Today we'll be talking about the role of women in the Civil War.
Prior to the market revolution, the cult of domesticity restricted a woman's place in 19th century America to the household, where she took care of the children, tended to her husband, cooked, and cleaned. Omitted from the Constitution, this marginalized group had virtually no political rights, and women did not receive an education until the emergence of the idea of Republican motherhood. The Second Great Awakening brought about many social reforms, including a new wave of feminism that called for equal rights for women. The breakout of the Civil War was an opportunity for women to fight for equal rights as they took on crucial roles that greatly impacted the outcome of the Civil War. Some courageous and patriotic females disguised themselves as male soldiers to fight in the Civil War because it was illegal for women to serve in the military. Women who disguised themselves as male soldiers usually went unnoticed due to ill-fitting uniforms, short haircuts, and the fact that soldiers were volunteers who had no background experience in the battlefield. Jenny Hodges went undercover as a male soldier known as Albert Cashier. She enlisted in the Army at Belvidere, Illinois, and fought in over 40 regiments, including the Siege of Vicksburg, where she was captured while scouting to gain information about the landscape of the battlefield. Hodges managed to escape without her gender being found out by wresting a gun away from a Confederate soldier and fleeing back to the safety of the Union. After her escape, Hodges served a full enlistment and went on to collect a veteran's pension. Hodges was the only known woman to receive a veteran's pension after the war. At the end of her life, Hodges was buried in her full uniform with the name Albert Cashier in military service on her tombstone. Women who were discovered were no longer welcomed in the military, but faced very little consequences in general.
Women also played an important role as nurses during the Civil War. Altogether, there were around 620,000 deaths, and without the help of nurses, the amount of deaths would have probably surpassed that. Nurses did not only have to deal with battle wounds, but they also had to treat diseases as best as they could.
During the beginning of the Civil War in 1861, there were no trained nurses in the United States, but clearly they were needed. When women saw the need for medical assistance, they were inspired to help. Approximately, there were 5,000 to 10,000 nurses who volunteered. Since many women did not study nursing and were not well trained prior to the Civil War, they looked to notes from a woman by the name of Florence Nightingale for assistance. Florence Nightingale was a nurse who revolutionized the field of nursing. She is most known for her assistance in the Crimean War, where she and 34 other nurses came to assist in the most terrible hospital conditions. Hospitals had contaminated water, rodents, bugs, insufficient amount of supplies, and too many wounded soldiers to take care of. This was very similar to the conditions that nurses during the Civil War had to face. Mary Livermore, a nurse during the Civil War, said, "I forced myself to remain in the wards without nausea or faintness. Never again were my nerves disturbed by any sight or sound of horror. I was careful to hold myself under iron control until I had become habituated to the manifold shocking sights that are the outcome of the wicked business men call war. Nurses had to become accustomed to these terrible sights in order to remain calm." Another nurse who greatly contributed in the Civil War was a woman named Clara Barton. She was one of the first volunteers to come to a Washington infirmary to care for wounded soldiers. She later decided to leave the hospital and help soldiers on the field. She performed first aid, carried water, and made food for soldiers in the Union and Confederate prisoners. After the Civil War, she became a member of the International Red Cross, and in 1880 she established the American Red Cross, which still works today to provide emergency assistance, disaster relief, and disaster preparation and education in the United States.
Towards the end of the war, women were actually appreciated and recognized by physicians and soldiers that they had assisted, because overall, without their assistance, the death rate would have increased substantially.
The name is Mazenberg. Katie Mazenberg. Did you know there were spies in the Civil War?
No, not those spies. These spies.
Some of the more famous strategic battles that were won in the war were won because of the women spies. Some of the spies were for the North, the Union side, and some of the women spies were for the South, the Confederate side. One of the most famous spies from the South was Rose Greenhow, aka Rose. She was the wife of a wealthy, prominent doctor and had 8 children together. She rose in the ranks of Washington, D.C., and in the 1850s, her husband and 5 out of her 8 children died. She was a supporter of the Confederate cause, and she became a ringleader of an anti-Union spy network. She passed on secret information to Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard and more. But one day she received critical information about the Union's attack at Manassas, Virginia, and so she sent for her 16-year-old courier through 20 miles of Union territory to give a message to Beauregard. The President of the Confederate gave credit to her for their first victory at battle, which was Bull Run. In 1861, the head of the federal government, newly formed Secret Service, arrested her and her youngest daughter, and they were both sent to prison. She still sent cryptic notes to the Confederate leaders and made sure they got their message. She was later released, and the President of the Confederates sent her on a diplomatic mission to Europe to speak with Napoleon III and Queen Victoria. A northerner spy named Elizabeth Van Loo, a.k.a. Crazy Bet. She was a part of a wealthy slave-owning family. She went to a Quaker school in Philadelphia and came back with anti-slavery views. When her father died, she convinced her brother to free the slaves. Many of those freed slaves stayed on as paid servants. When the war started, her and her mother started to bring food and clothes to the Union soldiers in the Libby prisons. She smuggled them out of the prisons and their lives too. She also learned important military information from the imprisoned soldiers and the guards at the prison. She gave the information that she learned to the Union Army. Union General Benjamin Butler recruited her as a spy. She became head of the Union spy ring in Richmond, Virginia. She and her also famous spy servant Mary Bowser sent coded messages to the Union in invisible ink and hollowed out vegetables. She also convinced some Confederate people to join her and the Union. In 1865, Richmond fell to Union forces and she raised the Stars and Stripes flag. She became a pariah in her community. She earned the respect of a General Ulysses S. Grant. He appointed her postmaster in Richmond. She spent her final days in poverty because she spent a lot of her family's money in espionage activities. The family of a Union officer who she assisted in the war and was the grandson of Paul Revere provided for her until her death in 1900. She was later known as the woman who brought down Richmond. It's now time for the mystery document. Here's the quote. When the wounded arrived, or rather began to arrive, the first one brought in was Daniel Anderson of our company. He was badly wounded, then others of our boys, some with their legs off, gone, foot off, and wounds of all kinds imaginable. They had to wade through creeks and marshes as they were discovered by the enemy and shelled very badly. The war now began. I gave my assistance to try to alleviate their sufferings. Gosh, who was this? President JFK? I was obviously wrong. It was actually Susie King Taylor from Reminiscences from My Life in Camp. If you got it right, kudos for you. If you got it wrong, you failed! And that's all the time we have for Mystery Document.
As the Union Army made its way throughout the South, a large number of freed black men enlisted to fight in the war, and their female family members often obtained employment in the unit. Women of color therefore came to play important roles in the war. African American women saw the Civil War as an opportunity to fight oppression and end slavery. Their services often included, but were not limited to, nursing or domestic chores in medical settings, washing uniforms, and cooking for the soldiers. Unlike most slaves, Susie King Taylor was very well educated and literate, which caught the attention of Army officials that had liberated slaves in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, the town Taylor and her family fled to. In St. Simon's, Taylor was offered a position as the first official black teacher to openly instruct African Americans. Upon accepting this offer, Taylor began teaching both children and adults. Alongside her husband, Taylor later accompanied the 33rd United States Colored Infantry Regiment, a unit consisting of the first African American soldiers serving in the Union Army. For 3 years, Taylor moved with the regiment, serving as laundress and the first black nurse. During the Civil War, Harriet Tubman, a former slave, worked for the Union Army as a nurse, cook, and spy. Over the course of 11 years, Tubman, known as Moses for her efforts in the Underground Railroad, rescued over 70 slaves in Maryland and assisted another 60 slaves in making their way to Canada. In 1862, she went to South Carolina to provide badly needed nursing care. Tubman also began spying and scouting missions behind Confederate lines. In 1863, she took part in an assault on several plantations along the Combahee River, rescuing more than 700 slaves. The Civil War enabled women to be seen in new light in America. Though some women remained at home awaiting the arrival of their husbands, brothers, or sons, many women took on non-traditional roles that were just as important as those their male counterparts played. From fighting on the front lines, to tending to the fallen and the wounded, to to becoming agents of espionage, the role of women, white and black, paved the way for future generations of women to have a place in politics, the medical field, and protecting our country.
Thanks for watching! Hope you learned something new. Hope to see you next week. Like and subscribe!